Okay, yeah, we'll get started right away. So welcome everybody. First, I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. So we wish to acknowledge this land on which ASAP operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So hello everybody and thanks for joining. So this panel is hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Women's Group, or ICWG, and the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention, also known as ASAP. So just a little bit about ASAP. It was started in 1989 as the AIDS crisis was looming in the streets of Toronto by members of a queer South Asian support group. The members of this group reflected the diversity of the South Asian community in Toronto at the time, having roots in South Asia and diasporas in Africa and the Caribbean. Today, ASAP's work is focused on areas that many South Asian, Indo-Caribbean, and Middle Eastern communities find uncomfortable facing, such as sexuality, sexual health, and homophobia. Awesome. So I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. So hello, everybody. My name is Ravina. My pronouns are she, her. I recently joined the ASAP team and the Indo-Caribbean Women's Group as the Indo-Caribbean Youth Peer. I do identify as being Indo-Caribbean. I'm first-generation Canadian, and I have Indo-Caribbean immigrant parents. I'm also joined by my colleague, Srutika, who's the Indo-Caribbean Health Coordinator. So just a little bit about the Indo-Caribbean Women's Group. So we are funded by the Toronto Urban Health Fund. We aim to have open discussions and raise awareness in a culturally sensitive manner around taboo topics such as healthy relationships, safer sex practices, and HIV and STI prevention. Because our perspective is very informed by the principles of reproductive justice, we also include topics such as sexuality, mental health, self-care, and general well-being. Our project goal is to do meaningful engagement through workshops, social events, and one-on-one sessions. So all that being said, thank you all for joining our panel today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to attend this event. So our intention with this panel is to feature the voices of queer Indo-Caribbean folks. Each panelist brings to the table unique perspectives, discoveries, revelations, and experiences to show that being queer and Indo-Caribbean is not homogenous. So the title of our event, Tek Up Space, emphasizes the need for Indo-Caribbean folks to find space in South Asian and Caribbean spaces, as we're often left out due to our complex identity and history. So without further ado, let's meet our panelists. So we're going to start with Ayesha.
Hello and namaste and assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Ayesha, and I wanted to start the night off. I was asked by my fellow panelist, Joan, who joins me in a spiritual tradition, to start off with a breathing exercise. And I think it's a fantastic way to just get grounded and get rooted in our own spaces, especially since we can't join each other physically tonight. So for all of you at home, and especially to my fellow panelists who might be having a little bit of nerves and jitters right now, I'm going to do something that activates what's called the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is a really integral nerve that runs through your body. And when the key thing about this nerve is that when you stimulate it, you actually calm yourself. So what I'm going to ask you to do is do something called ujjayi breathing. And if you're not familiar with that, you can just take regular breaths, but just try to take them nice and deep into your belly. But ujjayi breathing is where you relax the throat. So the breathing, you can feel it slightly grazing your throat. You can feel it a little bit in your epiglottis, and you would almost very faintly be able to hear a whispering sound. And if you're not able to do that, please don't hurt yourself trying to. You shouldn't feel it forcing or anything like that. Just do a regular breath. And so I'm going to count you in to the way that we do it. You're welcome to close your eyes if you'd like to. And the way that we're going to do it is we're going to do 4 counts on the inhale. Then you're going to hold it for 4 counts. Then you're going to exhale for 6 counts. And then you're going to hold it twice. And we're just going to do that maybe about 5 times just to sort of get situated, get comfortable, and ready to open up with each other. So I'd like you to sit flat. Flatten your feet. Just make sure you're not like leaning on any particular side of your body more than the other. Try to be nice and centered so you can feel that cooperation between the 2 nadis of your body. And we will begin. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold, hold, and release. So now you can join us back in the virtual space. I hope you're feeling calm and refreshed. And I'd like to now introduce myself. Unfortunately, there are too many things I do, so I have to look at my own notes for my bio. But I'm a community worker and an activist in Jane and Finch community. So I'm a child of Indo-Guyanese immigrants, and I also worked as a constituency assistant for the local city councilor in this neighborhood. His name is Anthony Peruzza. I'm a journalist and a digital communications manager for a local paper called the Dansby Advocate. I'm also an academic, so I'm a master's candidate for public policy, administration, and law at York University. I also co-founded and am currently co-chair of something called the Guyana Community House Project, which aims to bring affordable cooperative housing, a recreational facility, and wraparound services to the Guyanese community. I do also sit on the board of several different organizations, which include the Center for Women and Trans People at York University, and I'm also now the Ontario Women's Representative for the New Democratic Party's Federal Council. I do as well dance Kathak as a hobby, which is a form of North Indian classical dance, and I'm also a spiritual facilitator in something called the Shaktis tradition, which is a feminist religion associated with Hinduism and is based on ancient Dravidian goddess traditions from South Asia, which are also very queer friendly.
Peace, everyone. Just want to send some love and appreciation to Ayesha for that breath exercise. I'm really basking in the pleasure and beauty of that right now. So I'm really appreciating that joy that you gifted all of us here today. So my name is Joan, and I identify as a Indo-Caribbean, Caribbean, West Indian, South Asian, Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese. All of that, yes, and there's more. So I also identify as gender non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. And I like to call myself a pleasure and wisdom doula, which means that when you are in my presence, my responsibility is to ensure that you feel the beauty of your own conscious mastery as well. And so that is really the work that I'm here to do. I'm here to be a healed leader. I'm here to be a mentor. I'm here to be an educator, and really to help my community and my fellow siblings embody healing as liberation. And that's really my bottom line. And I hope that that's just utterly clear, because that's really the center of my work. It's embodied healing.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I can't go after those amazing introductions. I'm at a loss for words, but thank you so much for having me here. It's such an honor to be on this panel. I am Indo-Caribbean from the warm tropical island of Trinidad and Tobago. I rep for Trinidad and Tobago, and so I'm queer. I'm an LGBTQ activist. I work in the communities here in Toronto. Currently, I'm working with people living with physical and intellectual disabilities, QT/BIPOC communities in right here in Scarborough, where I live. I also sit on the board of the SAN, which works with prisoners and ex-prisoners living with HIV. I'm also part of the Interior AIDS Network at PL/HIV Advisory Committee. And that's a couple of things I've been doing for the last year or two. I'm also an HIV activist. I'm someone who's openly living with HIV for over 20 years. So part of my activism also includes work around HIV and sexual health. And so I'm honored to be here again.
Yes, hello everyone. I also am super excited and honored to be here. I don't know, a little bit about me. I'm 25 years old. This is my first year of teaching. I'm a teacher by trade. What a strange introduction into the world of teaching that it's been. I see, well, my my brother's already memeing on me. This is the first time I'm on a panel of anything like this. I currently am based in Kitchener, Ontario. However, I was born and raised in Vaughan, Ontario, which is where I am now, as you can see from this lovely couch that I'm sure many of you recognize if you're here. I did my undergrad at Western University, and I studied music education. So I trained in opera singing, which I guess is a cool little tidbit there. And yeah, I teach high school music and English. And I guess I did say in my description that I'm a baby queer, and I would say I kind of lied and I kind of didn't. I've been kind of a toe in and out of the queer community. I would not say that I'm an activist in any sense of the word. And I think something that's interesting about my journey, as you can see, is, or that as you might hear later on, is that I am currently what is known as an ex-evangelical. I was raised evangelical Christian, and yeah, I live in a big queer family. All my siblings are queer, and yeah, that's some interesting stuff about me. I'm also queer, obviously. So that's it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer, Ayesha, Joan, and David. We're so happy to have all four of you here. And thank you for those wonderful introductions. All right, we're going to move on to our first question now. I'm sure everybody's waiting for these questions. All right, so how do you define queerness, and what was your introduction to queerness? So Ayesha, I'll let you start.
So the way that I've distilled it down to, I think, is persecuted difference as it pertains to sexuality. So like any sort of difference from the contrived norm or the contrived default that settler society, white, cis, hetero patriarchy sort of projects onto you as it pertains to the way you comport sexually. I feel like that encompasses a wide variety of things that we're only just beginning to sort of understand. And my own introduction to queerness was my own urge, right? That I felt different, that I had different urges than the people around me were at least saying that they had. And I felt completely odd, completely out of place. I was a child, very young, and definitely didn't have any safe spaces that I felt like I could talk about that with. So my experience was thinking that I was an abomination. And asking, I would ask my mom, like, why women don't marry women or men don't marry men. And she kind of laughed and she said, like, they do, but she didn't say anything further than that. And I never had any kind of talk with anybody that was anything constructive about what queerness could be. And the first sort of interaction I had with queerness as a collective concept was my family members making fun of other family members that they might have been closeted gay. So my introduction with it was a sort of personal reckoning and like a personal coming out of my own self and reckoning with the fact that people that I loved very much hated a certain part of me and I could never say out loud what I was.
Thank you for sharing, Ayesha. And next we have Joan.
Yeah, so for me, how do I define queerness? I would say that the way that it feels for me right now in this moment is it feels like it's a very dynamic experience of my own expression. And queerness feels like it's multi-dimensional, right? It's not one-dimensional and it's not static. It's fluid and it flows. It's in movement, right? So queerness for me, it doesn't look one way all the time. Actually, it's beyond that. It's a free flowing expression of my being. And that is beyond the constructions of, our social ideologies. Queerness for me right now is beyond the structures of social ideologies. And very much here in the West, our idea of queerness is very much attached to biology. And that's one-dimensional and very limiting, a very limiting understanding of queerness when it's only attached to the biology. Because queerness, as my panelists mentioned, is actually an expression that challenges the hegemonic Western discourse. So that's very fluid, right? That opposition. And my first experience with queerness really, like my conscious experience with queerness really began when I migrated to Canada. And I was watching a late night TV show with my father. Folks may know this, depending on how old you are. Jerry Springer. And so this was my first introduction to queerness, was when I really migrated here and I would see that. And to me, the way I understand it now is it was an underground introduction to queerness is what it was. And so it was messy, it was convoluted, I didn't understand it, and there was violence involved in it as well. The things that we would see on the show, how queer bodies were being responded to when they would tell their significant other, hey, I'm queer, whatever that looks like. And so this was my first conscious experience with queerness, and that did a lot of stuff to me. But we'll get into that conversation, but I just want to pass the mic.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Joan. And now we have Jennifer.
Oh, so I think honestly, Ayesha explained it, like took the words right out of my mouth in such a beautiful and succinct manner. I was going to say something along the lines of queerness being kind of on a spectrum. I have a very hard time with black and white thinking. And so for a long time, even till this day, I struggle to fit myself into labels and to say, well, this must look a specific way. Recently, I've been more comfortable calling myself queer without affixing any sort of specific label to it, be it like lesbian, gay, like asexual, aromantic, those kinds of things. I would just say I'm queer and leave it at that. Though I would say that queerness as a definition for me, at least, is something that, like Ayesha said, kind of is not the very typical narrative that we've been presented with, which is straight. In a very like allosexual, alloromantic straight, anything that is outside of that would be considered queer. And that's kind of the way I see it right now. Though my first introduction to queer, this might be a little bit very niche, I think, but I spent a lot of my childhood and growing up kind of social time in online spaces, especially within like maybe the nerdy subset of online. I spent a lot of my time as a preteen on a website called DeviantArt, and I found an artist who liked to draw Sonic the Hedgehog characters, reading the Bible, and doing Christian stuff. And then I checked their journal, and they said, "No Yuri or Yowie allowed." And of course, as a 12-year-old, I was like, "What is that?" And I looked it up, and Yuri and Yowie are basically, it's a like it's a specific Japanese genre based on queer relationships in a very like flanderized way, obviously, but that was my first introduction to that. I later went on to make more queer friends online and well, in person, but I didn't know that yet. I had a friend who identified openly as bi, and so that was my first introduction to queerness. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. And I see your brother in the chat is just always there to
yeah,
respond to
yeah,
you. So
sorry.
thank you,
Sorry,
Josh. Shout out to you,
apologize.
Josh. Excellent. All right. And David.
So I have a very different experience with queerness. I'm a newcomer to Canada. I've only been here close to 5 years. And the idea of queerness coming from a very Caribbean perspective was something that was very North American and white in my mind. When I heard the word queer, I always remember Queer as Folk or these shows that had these kind of images of white cisgendered people talk about themselves being queer. So I never connected to the idea of queerness until I got here. And so for me, coming into my queerness is a journey. It's always been this journey and still continues to be a journey as I discover and embrace parts of myself and learning to allow myself, give myself that permission to be authentic. And so for queerness for me holds those ideas of embracing my femininity, embracing my identity, embracing a lot more to myself than I was hesitant to embrace before, or I didn't have the space to navigate or to negotiate before. And so now I'm allowing myself, I'm giving myself the permission to do that. So that's what queerness is to me.
Thanks, David. Did you want to speak on your introduction to queerness also, David?
I don't think I have had a specific, so as the panelists were talking, I remember my own time back home. And so now I do drag. Now I perform as Aldika, and that's a different story to itself. I was such a setup to get to the other panelists, but now they know. But I remember even before I knew what drag was, I remember performing in my grandmother's gallery, in my grandmother's living room, to songs like Around the World by Lisa Stansfield. And I had no idea I was doing lip sync performing. I was just doing the song because I liked to do the song. And I was just doing it on my own. And then it hit me when I came here and I started to do performing. I was like, wait a minute, I was doing this when I was a kid, like 12, 13 years old, you know. And I was like, okay, now I understand. Now I made the connections. So my queerness had this kind of weird association with doing things, but at the same time, there's a sense of shame and secrecy involved in doing them. I was always the very feminine boy because I went to secondary school in dress shoes. I was the only boy in school, in a secondary school, in dress shoes, and the baggiest of pants ever. I hated sneakers. Till today, I hate sneakers. My only sneakers Converse. All that became part of who I was back home. And all of that is part of my queerness. Me, you know, being queer without having the language or the words to put it. This is how I felt comfortable. And it's how I felt I could express myself and how I did express myself. Of course, that exposed me to a lot of ridicule, a lot of shaming, a lot of name calling, being called sissy, being called faggot, being called later on chichi man, all of these different things. So that was my introduction to queerness. It was not a very smooth one, a very rough one. And so, yeah, it's one that I'm beginning now to unpack and rediscover and come to terms with myself.
I kind of wanted to just throw a little piece in there and kind of uplift a segment that David mentioned, which was the story about like the performing when they were a child. And I really love that so much because what it's saying to me is that where were the moments in my childhood where I was being queer but didn't realize I was? And that's so beautiful. I just kind of wanted to uplift like you saying that, because that's a really beautiful entry point to explore how we've always been queer but never really knew we were being queer.
And I just add then like queer as opposed to what? Because if it's so inherent in us and if it's something that we're doing and if we hadn't been told that this was wrong, then what's it queerer then? What's it different then?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I have a conversation I was having with my cousin this morning about another issue, and she lives in Trinidad, and I was saying to her that my being gay has not been a choice. So when you use was like choice, that makes me feel like I could wake up today and decide to be something else. It's never been a choice. I knew that I was different. I knew that I saw life differently as a child, even before my first romantic sexual relationship. I knew that I was attracted to this, and I didn't have a language. I didn't have words to express it. So yeah, that was part of my, I just wanted to add that.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you all for contributing onto that too. Thank you so much. I muted myself. I'm so sorry. So sorry. Our next question now, David, I'm going to have you talk a little bit more. Sorry about that. So it's mostly addressed to you, being our newcomer on the panel. So is there a difference between being Indo-Caribbean and queer growing up in the Caribbean versus growing up in Canada? So how has geography, so the Caribbean versus Canada, influenced your queerness? And I do invite the other panelists to speak upon this if they have anything that they'd like to share about maybe traveling, or if they had memories of growing up being younger in the Caribbean. But yeah, we'll start off with David.
A couple of things. Identity is such a huge thing here. Back home, I didn't have to think about, oh, I'm Indo-Caribbean and queer. I was just queer or gay. Here I do, because that now factors into how I position myself, how my intersectionality comes into play now. Back home, I was Indo-Caribbean people, Indo-Trinidad people are 0.5% of the population. I move across here and now we're not half of the population anymore. We're not a majority, we're like a minority. And so now I have to think about that. Back home, my gayness was something that some spaces I was allowed or to be gay, and I was explaining this to someone. I would go to a gay bar or gay club, and the minute I walk into the bar, I'm like, hey, I'm here. Woo. But the minute I walk out, I had to kind of adopt this straight posture. And it was always that kind of negotiation. Like I couldn't cross my legs at a straight bar because I could get called out. So I had to sit and hold my beer like rough. And my strangely enough, my pinky finger always goes out when I hold a beer, right? But I couldn't do that in a straight bar because that's not a sign. So it had to be just kind of way of unnecessarily and forcibly having to navigate your space there. But here it's different. I'm allowed to be who I am. Of course, there are cautions because I have to be mindful of the environment that I live in, but it's not as harsh or as brutal as it was back home. So now here, I'm accepted as being gay and queer by legal means, but by my Indo-Caribbeanness, something that I now have to negotiate very differently. And so I often question, where do I fall within the South Asian umbrella? Because I'm not Black. By some people, I'm not considered to be Black. I'm definitely not white, clearly. I don't want to be either. But some South Asian folks, they don't see me as Indian because I did not directly come from a state in India. So I came from a Caribbean country called Trinidad and Tobago. So to identify myself as Indo-Caribbean is now like intentional, like I intentionally have to do it when I didn't have to do it before. And so those are some of the things that I'm negotiating now in this space as a newcomer.
That's really cool, David. And I actually resonate a lot with what you've said, despite I think coming from the opposite spectrum. I was born, I didn't put this in my intro. I was born in Canada, but my parents were born in Guyana. And they moved here when they were teenagers. My dad was 16, my mom was 19. And I grew up in Vaughan or Thornhill, Ontario. It's quite like, you know, I feel like the population there skews largely more towards white, I would say. And I grew up never really knowing what my culture was, thinking that things like weird things that my family would do were just weird family things. Nobody outside knew about what callaloo was. Whenever I tried to talk about callaloo, they'd be like, what is that? So I always kind of grew up being like, okay, this is the weird things my family does that I know from my family. And it wasn't until actually my 4th year of university, strangely enough, because I went to Western, right? That was also a very largely white population. And I took a chance course in food history and we learned about colonialism. And I was like, oh, that's what happened. Like I knew my grandmother would tell me stories about the British and, you know, about indentured like laborers and whatever. And then I would think, oh, people are calling me Indian. People are like, what, but what am I? I don't know. Right. Still though, I felt like I understand that kind of social pressure here too, or navigating your Indo-Caribbeanness, if that's a word. I understand that totally because that is theoretically what I've been doing my whole life, is trying to figure out, well, I'm different in some way. How different am I from my peers? How come I'm not fitting the same mold and anguishing over it? And I feel like almost my queerness has been an extension of that. I'm different from my peers in some way, just like it's always been, right? I can't just compare myself and look at all my white peers. Also, most of my peers, if not all of them, are white, and being like, why? How am I so different? What's going on? Right. So I totally get where you're coming from. And it's interesting to think that we share the same thing despite being born and having 2 completely different contexts of being raised.
Oh my. goddess. Like just the themes that you're talking about, I really want to build on, Jennifer, of like queerness. And like someone might come at face value and say like, what does being Indo-Caribbean have to do with queerness? But in reality, it falls along the same lines. I actually think that queerness can never be disconnected from race, because the way that you're going to fight those two things is ultimately the same thing. That's what the deconstruction of racialization is. It's queerness. The problem that you're going to find, like with trying to deconstruct it, you're going to find the same issues. You're going to run across the same pain bodies. And an example that I want to give of like how I think these two things are in essence so similar and why they need to be treated as a parallel in many ways is a very personal one. But I once had an ex-boyfriend, and he was you could call him closeted. He was bisexual, but he didn't want to admit it to himself that he was at the time when he was dating me. So he would take it out on me in the form of really intense misogyny and in terms of like policing my body. So he would talk a lot often about my body hair. He would really, really hate my body hair, but in reality, like he was attracted to it. In his mind, he associated that with masculinity. He associated it with men. But I don't have body hair because I'm a man. I have body hair because I'm Indian. So the way that like it would have to be sort of deconstructed when if you want to queer the landscape, it's going to fall along those same lines. So I really love that you're drawing those parallels, because you're absolutely right. And as someone with kind of like the double whammy is going to face it more, right?
So I'm loving that language that you're using of like queering the lens. I think that's so beautiful and like really important language, because that's what queering is. It's seeing those hierarchies and those categories that we're all kind of trying to fit into or like perform in some kind of way. And so queering the lens is really deconstructing that and like really seeing the matrix or the interconnected web of oppression of it. And that's what queerness really is. Like when I really think about queerness, it's actually a lens that we are looking through to understand our outer world and to understand the experiences we are having of ourselves that is created by these networks and systems. So yeah, I love that. Queering the lens, important language.
Yeah, beautifully said. I love that too. Thank you all for chiming in on that. That kind of brings us to talking a little bit about the next question as well, as have you found queer affirming family and communities, and have you found them or maintain them, or how have you found them or maintained them, and what made you feel safe and what made you feel alienated? So is it okay if Ayesha, I address that to you first?
Sure, perks of having a name that starts with A, I guess. But yeah, I mean, my queer circle that I found in high school was life affirming and life saving for me. They were the first place that I ever felt like I could be myself and explore what it meant to be queer. And then there are stages that you take within that, right? But I recently reconnected with a friend I haven't seen in a while who comes from that circle. And she told me, she's trans, and she told me, Ayesha, you were the first person I came out to. And I was shocked, because I had always in my mind, it's funny, before she had even said that she felt like a woman, I always coded her as a woman. Like for some reason in my mind, it was just innate, like her energy spoke to me as a woman. And so that's just how I felt. And I never was going to say anything about it. But then she came and said to me, Ayesha, I feel like I'm a woman. And I believed her. But something I wonder is like, why did it take her like 2 decades of life to find one person who she felt like she could say that to? And I'm still flabbergasted by that to this day, in a place where we feel like we can be out in the open, and I'm sure that we can, especially, you know, speaking to the experiences of people like David, who have had to live so under such repression. But still, like those communities, they're hard to find, and they're hard to foster and maintain. And I can think of times too, like when I didn't do the best job at maintaining a safe environment for queerness. I'm gonna talk to one of my own low points, I guess you could say, is that we were having a meeting for the Guyana Community House, and we were talking about our favorite Guyanese word, and someone said the word, I'm like, content warning, someone said anti-man. And people kind of laughed, and I didn't say anything about it. I didn't call it out. But afterwards, like somebody called it out. And so then I made a big thing of it. Like we decided to implement policies, but I can think of times when I also wasn't the best ally in certain spaces too. So I think that maintaining those spaces and maintaining those safe spaces involves active allyship. So I should, instead of feeling awkward and not saying anything and kind of like letting the moment pass, like I should have stood up better. But I also think that it's about that interpersonal dynamic. It's about making sure that people feel safe to express and explore their own identities differently. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, thoroughly too. Thank you so much, Ayesha. Jennifer, I see you nodding a lot. Did you want to add on to that?
Oh yeah, no. First of all, Ayesha, that was brave. Oh my gosh, that was amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. What was I gonna say? I don't know. I just feel like it all resonated with me. I guess to my own experiences though, I have found like queer affirming spaces all around, like, you know, just throughout my life without realizing it. You know, when you grow up and you have childhood friends and then you see them as you distance yourself and then you realize you're like, oh, like they were all queer. When did that happen? So that happened a lot in elementary school, in high school, though. I was kind of like Ayesha, like being able to maybe by the end of grade 12 say, oh, I think maybe I might be bi. Later I came out as like a full-blown lesbian, so that, you know, like, but I think my main friend group right now, I refer to them as my chosen family. They're a group I play D&D with every Tuesday, and they are all white. So again, I share a very like kind of white friend group. Um, though I would argue that my family is kind of also a queer affirming space. I have a younger sibling who is non-binary, who's 2 years younger than me, and a brother who's 4 years younger than me, who have been both typing very avidly in the chat. Thank you. They're both very queer. So that's great. Yeah, I feel like I've been fortunate enough to have lots of space and lots of support for this, especially since I like to tiptoe. I don't like to cause very many waves in society. So it took me a long, painfully long time to come out, and then really to come into my own after I left the church in January 2020 was when I fully was like, okay, I think I'm ready to start embracing my queerness. So I think the support group has been completely enriching for me there too. And I'm actually fortunate enough now that I'm starting to get more acquainted with my Indo-Caribbean side as well. I recently entered into a relationship and my partner is Indo-Guyanese as well. And they have started to help me understand my culture a little bit better. They actually introduced me to this group, so that's why I'm here as a panelist. So hopefully it will only continue to go up from here, where I'm starting to reconcile with different parts of myself and, you know, be better.
Thank you, Jennifer. Joan, did you want to speak next on that?
So navigating queerness growing up was really challenging and confusing. Hey, that's not a new narrative we hear. So, you know, one of my cousin was actually queer and was just always out and open and queer all the time. And our family kind of just accepted that he was queer and that was it. There was no like uproar about it. And so I was always kind of exposed to this relationship with queerness just because my cousin was openly queer. And so that was present in my life. But I guess even though that was present in my life, I started questioning sexuality and gender when I was probably about 10. And that, you know, there was a lot of fear in questioning gender and sexuality at that time, especially because it was exposed to like late night trash TV and what I was seeing. And there was this fear around just being different. And there was this fear inside of me of, you know, what if one day I realize I'm trans and queer? Oh my God, the horror. The horror because of the violence attached to those bodies, right? That was the underlying fear for me. And so even though there was this fear, what I realized in retrospection was there was always this calling, though, that this calling by queerness. Queerness was always calling me. And it was through just other queer folks in the community who were just open and queer, you know? And so I was really just exploring, what is queerness? What is that? You know, there's something familiar about it. There's something safe about it. There's something soothing about it for me when I'm exposed to it. What is that? Right. And so it was really community members, like local community members, Kim Milan, like finding her work and being exposed to that. A couple of other folks in the States as well, like local community members who are just open and queer and putting out work and talking about stuff. And it was really just like, and it was also like Black queer love that really also like healed my relationship with love as well. I was seeing that it can be tender, it can be soft, it can be safe. So I was really just doing this exploration. I didn't really have a community per se. I was just exploring and finding folks in the exploration that was really helping me question things in a very gentle way that was kind of melting away all the filters that I had around gender and sexuality and race. And it wasn't until probably in my mid-30s that I actually found safe community, queer community to like support me, and that I consciously started seeking out queer community to be around me. So now I actually have queer community. Now I have actually a plethora of queer folks around me, BIPOC queer folks specifically, you know, almost religiously, because I know how like in need my spirit is to have these bodies around me. You know, so now it's like my spiritual spaces that are queer or queering, that's a must. They have to be queering, or else it's not safe enough for me. It's still filled with violence if it's not a queering space. You know, so I'm very meticulous and conscious about the spaces that I'm in now. It has to have a queer lens. It just has to.
Perfect. Yeah, and David, you can go ahead.
I was trying to figure out where to rub my hand. I connect with lots of what Jennifer said. Thank you, Jennifer. Because for me, it was a struggle. It's not easy. We grew up in a Caribbean country does not have a lot of queer filming spaces, or gay spaces are kind of very secretive and very reclusive and hard to get to. Your finding community in those spaces can be a challenging one. And so in my quest to find community, or quest to find others who look like me, I put myself in some very dangerous situations. And it's hard to say this, but it was very sexually exploitive, because I was this young guy coming into sexuality, trying to figure what it's all about, and having these sexual experiences that were dangerous, physically dangerous, physically risky, and feeling overwhelming sense of shame and guilt afterwards. I remember trying to connect. Eventually, I found an LGBTQ organization called Friends for Life, and they're still around today. Even my coming into that space to meet with them was a terror. I worked on a street. I worked in advertising at the time, and my office actually directly across from where they would meet. And I would see them going into this gateway, into the back of this house to have their weekly meetings. And I'd be terrified because I always wanted to go because I was curious, but a part of me was panicking. And I eventually went and I saw these gay people who were very flamboyant and very feminine and very expressive. And I thought to myself, if I was to say that I was gay, would I become that person? I did not want to become that image. And a lot of my connection to that community was done very secretly, because at the same time, I was also going to church. I was trying to be a good Christian boy. I become this born again Christian. So I was going to church and doing all these Christian-like things, but at the same time, leading this other life that was just freaked out. And so it was confusing. It was me having to negotiate and fight and struggle and deal with those things. I remember going to church every Sunday and crying because I felt so much pain. I felt so much hurt that I just wanted it to stop. Eventually, I stopped going to the church because I met this guy and I fell in love and we had a first relationship. And this is after I found out my HIV status and I had just rebounded. I was just recovering from it. And I found this guy and I fell in love and I told myself, you know what? I'm doing more hurt to myself. I'm doing more damage to myself by trying to live this double life. And eventually I came out of the church. I still hold on to my spirituality, but I do not need the church to kind of to add to it. And so that's how I learned to contend with my friends. And so Friends for Life, which stands today, and people like Esty Padmore, who's alive and well. I've seen so many of my friends who were part of that group who've died from AIDS complications. I remember going to the funeral of one of them, and his family his body stayed outside the church for 3 hours. The pastor refused to open the church because the body or the person was gay. At the funeral side, the family was in a verbal battle with Friends for Life group because they blamed us for making him gay. And even though we were there till the very end. And I saw that, I couldn't fathom that level of hate and animosity that came. And I was crying. I wasn't crying because my friend had died. I was crying because of the hate that I saw. And I said, no, this can't continue. And that kind of is one of the reasons why I've become an activist, was to fight against this level of ignorance, this level of shaming that happens. It was not easy because I came out as an HIV activist, but it was still kind of negotiating my gayness because the link between HIV and gay men is so strong that if I said it, they would have taken away from my HIV activism. But eventually, I came to that spot where I said, you know what, I am going to do it. And of course, I got to that stage. And so, yeah, I think I'm rambling on a bit, but essentially that is my negotiation.
Thank you so much for sharing that, David. And I commend you all on your bravery to share your experiences. And we really appreciate you speaking today. Just to go off of you mentioning a bit about your activism, that actually brings us to our next question here. So if anybody else is interested, they can speak a little bit about their activism and the movements and frameworks that have influenced you on your work. So I will let Joan, did you want to get started on that one?
Sure. I'm trying to think, how do I talk about my activism? So I guess the simplest way that I like to talk about it is embodied healing as liberation, right? And if I was to like summarize what this body of work means, one, it's a manifestation of my consciousness being put into this world that encompasses healing to liberate us. And the liberation piece, what that really means is really reconnecting with our own divine being. That is what is the liberation, is the reconnection to our own divinity. And so this is important work for me because I strongly feel as the leaders of now, we are the ones that are going to take society forward. We're the one that's leading the direction, creating the path that we need to go, where we are learning to love each other, where we are learning to be in community together, where we are learning how to care. Right? Very simple, basic things we got to learn. We need to learn how to respect each other's sovereignty, right? And so if we are going to radically imagine a new world where we know how to love and care and be in community, we have to do the healing work. It's really that simple. And so my work is embodied healing and guiding and creating the space for that to be done in this lifetime, right? So for us all to lead the work that we need to do in this world to have the society that we are wanting here and now in this moment, not some far off time in the future. It's all here waiting for us. We just need to say yes to receiving the healing. So that's my activism, and it looks real funky. I mean, look at me, okay? It looks real funky. So it's manifested in a lot of different ways, but the underlying principle is what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joan. Ayesha, would you like to go next?
Sure. So activism is kind of just like my job at this point, so it's tough to get into like all of it, but where it started, my first event that I ever organized by myself, and this was just completely something I did by myself, not organizationally affiliated with anything, and it was years ago with this group of people I keep talking about, my little, I like to call them a ragtag bundle of queer misfits, and we came together and we just decided to make sandwiches and toiletry kits for people suffering from homelessness in Toronto over the winter. So we just came together and we were like, what can you bring? What can you bring to the table? And I like to think that a lot of my activism was forged out of like, where does mutual aid meet that philosophical pontificating? So like, as much as you need that sort of intellectual work of like understanding social justice, grasping it, coming to think, okay, getting angry at it, and then going through those cycles, almost like cycles of grief, of then like coming to like, first understand it, fight it, and then imagine yourself without it. Like you need to do those things as much as you need to on the ground provide support to other people who are going through it, to build networks, to build relationships. So I think a lot of my activism has been founded on that, but also through art. So when I was in university, I made this art exhibit called The Fourth Wall, and I used sort of like just material, like makeup, like things that women or like people who identify as women interact with that create that femininity. And this, I also want to say, this is why a lot of my activism and my love the femininity shows a lot of respect to drag queens, because I think drag queens, they face a lot of stigma and a lot of hate for wanting to perform femininity, and it just proves that femininity is something that is hated in this society. But I think like also, I mean, like the fact that we have contouring now, like we owe that to drag queens. Like there are so many things that we owe to drag queens, and I love them, and they definitely inform a lot of my activism and a lot of the way that I feel about femininity. But a lot of my activism is formed around like things like class, housing, so food security, but a lot of reproductive justice as well too. And something that I've been sort of lately reckoning with is fighting stigma around STIs as well. And sort of how do we have like really difficult conversations? And I think one of my favorite quotes of my own self, if I can just say it, because I was thinking about it the other day when it comes to pap smears and how afraid we are to talk about them, was if we can come out of cervixes, we can learn how to talk about them. Because I feel like we don't have on the table as much as we should when it, the issue that it comes that is encapsulated in reproductive rights and reproductive justice. So I'm now putting together a menstrual product drive with my office and with a local organization called the Bloom Red Project. So we're going to be getting menstrual product donations and then sending them through a local food bank, and we want them loudly branded, saying that these are menstrual product things, like we're just doing this, like this is going out in the newsletter, like I'm going to put this publicly, because we owe it to these bodies that we all exist due to the pain of, to show respect for what they need. So that's that's me. What informs my activism, I'd love to especially on the queer vein, like show some love to Audre Lorde, and you know, Marsha P. Johnson, who threw the first brick. Stonewall was a riot. Yeah, and I also think that my spiritual circle that I created is in and of itself an act of activism, because a lot of people could think of it as like blasphemous to just come into a tradition and then create your own space. Like sometimes just to exist as a queer woman, and especially to be a spiritual queer woman, is in and of itself an act of resistance and activism. And to pave the way and to create a safe space for other people who are like you to just sit and be and explore and ask questions, it shouldn't be revolutionary, but it is. So I think that my Shakti circle is also an act of activism. I hope that answers your question.
Again, very thoroughly. Thank you so much, Ayesha, for sharing. David, would you like to speak next?
Mind repeating the question?
Absolutely. So we are talking about I have question 5 here. So many of you are very much involved in activism. Could you speak a bit about your activism and what activists, movement, or framework have had influence on your work?
Okay, so now as I get time to pick up Trinidad and Tobago, because I really do believe that we have our stories that often don't get told. And I can stand where I stand now because of the like of Godfrey Seeley, a well-known HIV gay activist in Trinidad and Tobago, who also did theater, who staged the first theater production called One of Our Sons is Missing, that featured a bisexual character who got HIV way back in the 80s. He started a discussion and a conversation on HIV in a time when nobody was talking about it. So Godfrey Seeley is somebody that I look up to as an icon, as a legend. There's so many other drag queens who lived in that space, who by the act of living was revolutionary. They knew what it was like to face violence. They knew what it was like to face rejection. They knew what it was like to just exist day to day. Godfrey Seeley eventually he opened his own home at times to facilitate people who put out because they were gay. So his own house became a house that gay people made homeless lived at. The commercial sex workers, who most of whom were trans, they plied their trade on the same street that he lived. And oftentimes at night when the police came, they would run into his yard for safety. And he was fine with that. So that community space and him and his being is somebody that shoulders I can stand on, and credit for me being here. And so my activism has that to it. But I didn't start in HIV. I started actually in sex education, working alongside a group of young people who were advocating for comprehensive sex education in schools at a time when nobody was talking about it. We made news, major news, when by chance a condom was in a pamphlet that we were giving out to secondary school students outside. It wasn't intentional. We were giving out safe sex literature outside of school, and in one of the brochures, there was a condom. And that became a huge controversy in Trinidad and Tobago. Every politician, every religious leader had something to say about it. And so eventually, that was where my activism started. I moved on to sitting on the board of a women's health, reproductive health organization called Aspire, who are advocating for safe abortions. Of course, that's another controversial issue. I don't know why I attract controversy. And then I moved into HIV activism fully after that. After my diagnosis of HIV, after my diagnosis, and I gotten treated, and I was fine. I moved back. I moved into full-time HIV activism. And HIV activism followed me because I went back to advertising. But every advertising agencies I worked with, post my treatment, was working on an HIV campaign, and I was writing for that campaign. So my life is designed to be where I am now. Activism is what brought me here to Toronto, because I came here as a guest to speak about my work as a leader of a movement back in Trinidad and Tobago. And that's when I came here actually for a month to talk about my work, and ended up staying because I opted to choose myself, which of course is a form of self-activism at that point, because I needed to take a step to take care of my own health, my own mental and emotional health. And so I opted to stay and remain in Toronto. And that's why I'm here. I hope I answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David, for sharing. And Jennifer, did you want to speak on that question?
Sure. This is short and sweet though. I don't do any activism of any form. I think, first of all, I guess it's just because I think for me right now, where I still am unpacking a lot of my own history and shame around queerness, it would be I need to be able to feel more comfortable with myself first before I can start to reach out and help other people. That isn't to say that I never want to do it. I think in the future, when I get more opportunities to do so, I'm currently a supply teacher, but I have already started to kind of not make waves, but I've been trying to speak out more for LGBTQ2S plus support in the schools that I've been working at. I feel like my activism, if it would ever start, would be a quiet kind of activism, one that is kind of leading by example. And I think just in general, I focus a lot of my attention towards, in education, for example, making a safe space for my students to exist, and just making sure that they're feeling like they're comfortable enough to be able to learn and to have a sense of community. And I try my best in whatever form to help facilitate that for my classrooms. And I think that would pass on the baton to perhaps braver folks than I, in the future, to be able to stand up for themselves and to be able to see the value in themselves. I think that also lends it very closely, I think, to my music teaching, because music in itself is a form of community. I don't know if you've been a part of music classrooms, but they're just, you see this very tight-knit kind of family. And once people have confidence enough to perform, to be able to have that sort of community, then who knows what they'll be able to do later. So I feel like a lot of my activism or future activism would be a quiet kind of activism in the education front. So maybe look out 5 years from now, see if my name is on any major major music education papers or whatever.
Yeah,
I
thanks
just
for
want to
joining, Jennifer.
uplift
Yeah.
like the really important activism work that Jennifer is doing, because I know that if there were queer resources made visible in high school for me, that would have made my experience exploring and questioning so much more transcendence for me. So I'm appreciating this activism that you're doing so much, and I just really want to uplift that as someone who would have really appreciated seeing that.
No, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't count yourself out as an activist. Everything that you spoke upon is definitely activism, and I'm sure the students who really need it the most really appreciate the work that you're doing. So thank you so much, Jennifer. All right, we do have a question that was sent in the chat, so I'm just going to read that out for you all. So it says, how do you address the way you want without feeling shy around your Indo-Caribbean friends and family? As a queer individual, currently feminine presenting, but sometimes I want to dress more androgynous or masculine, I'm afraid of expressing myself and worried about what other people around me may think. So I'm going to open that up to whoever would like to respond to that first.
First of all, I don't really have an answer, but I just wanted to say I am right there with you. My number one fear is what other people think of me, and that's probably why I've got one toe in and one toe out of the closet simultaneously. So I totally understand that. It is a real fear, and I just wanted to honor that because it is difficult. And I think, especially speaking to the experiences that I've heard other panelists say, most especially David, sorry to call you out, but I've had lengthy conversations with a lot of Indo-Caribbean friends of mine and about kind of the rigid social structure that can often take place there. And I think, especially if you grew up in that kind of environment, it's very difficult to try and perceive yourself outside of a norm. You want to fit in. You want to be able to appear competent and to appear in a certain manner. And if your grandmother was anything like my grandmother, it would be like, don't talk too loud, the neighbors might hear, right? You don't, right? Like, you're very I'm very concerned about that, and I think that's a very valid thing to have. I don't really have an answer, so please.
And I agree with you, Jennifer. It's not a very easy thing to answer. I mean, I still have those issues with my whole family back home. Like how do you even begin to, like I've been here for 5 years. When I go back home, I have to think about how do I dress? How do I look? What do I put on? I clearly can't wear my high heel boots to my family's gatherings because that's be another conversation. Like, and even those things are difficult to have and to decide, like, I don't know, but I can appreciate the asking. The most I can say is that for me, what has worked is that I've recognized that within my family circle, there are folks who are accepted. There are folks who are open-minded. There are folks who are more, they understand. They genuinely want to know more. And it's to work with those folks that you can work with and realize there's a generation of people who may never get it. And that's fine. If they don't get it, they don't get it. But there's some who do, and there's some who really want to know more.
I kind of want to share a little bit about my story with like reconciling with this a little bit, but I want to give a trigger warning that it does speak about like suicide ideation and mental health. So like for me, it always felt like the concept of womanhood and woman being and womanness in the way that it's constructed socially could never really encapsulate the presence and the essence of my being. And it always felt like my being really wanted to burst out of the seams of my body, and that the woman body and the woman performance didn't really encapsulate what the expression really is. But all of this understanding really came later on in my life. But I had my daughter when I was 18, 19. And when she was about 3, I was 23. I was really in a deep, dark depression, and it was triggered by a loss of a relationship with a cis hetero man, of course. So I was in a deep, deep state of depression, and every day I was contemplating suicide regularly. And suicide felt like the best possible solution for how I was feeling on the inside. To exit this world felt like the most beautiful thing I could do. And it was my daughter and my love for my daughter that really made me consciously sit with what I was contemplating, because I knew that the legacy I was going to leave for my daughter was not going to be that of unraveling the experience that they're having of their parents, and why did their parents choose to commit suicide at the age of 3, and how am I involved in that story? So I knew that was not going to be the legacy that I was going to leave my child with. And this kind of, just to bring it back full circle, relates to the question, because at that moment, what I heard was, you need to start caring about how you feel, or accept that you will be feeling this way for the rest of your life. Are you okay with that? And I knew that I wasn't okay with that. I knew I wouldn't make it very far, meaning I would commit suicide, right? And so I made the decision to care about how I was feeling. And that's important, because that was when I really stopped caring about what other people was trying to tell me, what other people wanted from me, because it was really life and death for me in that moment. And I was choosing life, my life, me, exploring me, knowing me, feeling me, tasting me. I had to, or else there was this feeling that was coming over me that made me feel like I don't want to be here anymore. And that was really the pivotal moment for me in really accepting myself, which really, down the path, realized there was a really bigger component of accepting my queerness that was attached to that, but I didn't really realize it at the precipice of it. Right? It was just that I was in such dark depression and really wanted to end my life. But the exploration really made me unravel so much trauma and harm. And that's why I talk about healing so much, because it was through the healing process that I really came into this deep connection with myself, where I could truly look like this in public and not give two shits of what anyone say to me. right? I don't care, because this is joy, this is beauty, this is glory, this is resilience, this is queerness, and this is not really caring what anyone has to say about it, because I'm choosing life, right? I'm choosing life. So it was really like, for me, it was a life or death, choice. It was a life or death choice. And ever since then, what Indo-Caribbean people say about my queerness is not my business. I'm choosing life, my life. And it sounds easy and it sounds woo-woo and it sounds spiritual, but it's not. When you choose your life and you choose to walk out in public like this and not care what anyone else is going to throw at you because they're going to throw stuff at you, you're really committing to something. I like to talk about being a warrior. We train to fight. And the fight is the outside world telling us we don't exist, it should be erased. So when you choose to walk like this, you are defying so much. When you choose life. Anyways, let me not get on a tangent.
Thank you, Joan. That was great. That was well said. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you everybody in the comments for all the big ups to everybody on the panel here. I love that. I love the support here. And Ayesha, did you want to speak on that too?
Briefly, I think I'm not the authority on coming out because, to be honest, I just never did it. Like, I just started behaving the way that I wanted to, and everybody, like, if you were on board with it, then okay, and if not, then okay. I have also been extremely okay with losing familial relationships, so I'm not like, it hurt me at first, and then I just remember waking up one day and realizing that just because people were related to me didn't mean that I had to value their opinions. It didn't mean that I had to value them as people. And I understand that this is very different of a realization or something that you can think it's privileged in a way, especially if you are at a point where, let's say, you could sustain yourself without certain approvals of theirs, or if like they're intimately connected with your survival, your root chakra depends on them. But I do remember definitely having a personal reckoning with myself where, like, yeah, there's an element of like, okay, this is my identity and I'm unafraid to be it, but there's also an element of my worth and my self-perception is not contingent upon what people feel about me. And that hinges, like, that's not just about queerness, that's about everything that's going to be revolutionary, that's going to be about your race, that's going to be about your gender, and intimately connected to queerness. But that realization of just like, okay, like maybe I need to feel comfortable first, but also like just the second layer of like, I cannot be waiting for everyone in my life to be a mirror of what I need to see. Sometimes I have to be that for myself. So I don't know if that's helpful.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. So I would love to continue these conversations further, and you all had incredible answers, but we are really pressing for time here now, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So we are going to wrap it up there. Sorry if we weren't able to answer your question, but I am going to put the socials of our panelists up on the screen very soon. So if you want to connect with them and have them answer your question, I'm sure you can connect with them via their socials and ask your questions there. But I just want to give a huge thank you to Joan, Ayesha, David, and Jennifer for participating in this panel. And we appreciate you so much. And we appreciate all that you do. And we're so happy that we were able to connect and give you this platform to share your experiences. So Jennifer, I hope you had a great first panel. We're so happy to have you here. And for everybody else too, thank you again so much for tuning in and for joining, for commenting, being in the chat and asking your questions. We really appreciate it. So panelists, just hang back for a few minutes, but everybody else, you're free to go to enjoy your evening. I hope you have a lovely one.
Anthony, could you just stay behind briefly?
And also, yes, Anthony Mohammed, if you have a few minutes, we'd love for you to meet our panelists as well. So you can also hang back, but everybody else have a wonderful evening. Enjoy the sunshine if it's anywhere you are, and if it's not, enjoy the weather outside. And we hope to see you all soon. Make sure, let me actually put the socials up first before anybody tunes out. I'm gonna almost forget to do that. So let me just put this up really quickly for everybody to see. So there's the
Also,
socials.
oops,
Oh,
I
sorry.
know mine is kind of underwhelming. It's just a, it's my personal, and I'm not very active on social media. So I'm just gonna share my partner's astrology Instagram channel just so that there's something to advertise there. I'm putting it in the chat there. It's alien_brain astrology. Yeah, give them a follow or a look through. Yeah, because I know my socials are not non-existent.
That's okay. But it's up there. And then again, Jennifer put the other one in the chat there. And if you want to connect with Shoot her and I, our emails are also at the bottom of the screen there. So be sure to follow us at Caribbean Woman to find out more about upcoming events and how to volunteer with us, etc. And we hope to see you all soon. So thank you.